like what can we do to have this whole movement catch on? You know what I mean?
The camera, but if you want to see where you are in the room, you can bring it back up. But
we're presenting to the select board.
Mostly get the audio, they capture that little picture when it plays back.
Okay.
That's how I'm cheating it in here.
It's like that's news to me, right?
In the background.
Yeah, we're going with that letter on Tuesday night.
Capture it all.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your help.
Okay, so same presentation, all three.
Oh.
Yeah, we're all sharing. Yep.
Perfect.
Oh, yeah.
Once we're down, back in between sessions to stop recording. But
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Oh, really?
Same thing,
Are you going because of a specific assessment or just the assessments in general?
Both. Yeah, it's nuts.
It's totally crazy.
Yeah, it's nuts.
I mean, what were they thinking? Well, I know what they're thinking. Three factors. Hello. I can smile at you because I'm eating.
I can only use my eyes.
I haven't learned how to make my eyes turn up.
You got a great place.
Well, so we're really working hard.
It is 12:18. I think we should give it another 3 or 4 minutes. I can run in there and see how long.
It's gonna be a struggle for us to stay afloat.
I heard you mention you know Sue.
Yeah. Actually, you guys let me with the weird. Yeah.
This was gonna go check on the line to see. Okay. It looks like sounds good. And so I'll just start taking some notes for you as you write.
Okay.
I mean, as you talk, and you can just, I guess, just follow me and when you want.
Yeah, it'll be pretty cool. Like after
Read out, and then if they come back, I'll call them on the groups and they can have their report and share what they came up with. Just write that down.
Yeah.
Oddly enough, once I got out, doing it at home, I got closer to.
Should have worn my contacts.
Yeah, glasses. I wear glasses too sometimes,
Yeah.
and they always fog up.
One was just never had.
On your place.
Yeah, not bad.
It's always like, good job.
What? You want that in front?
They raised my valuation.
You want to go hard in there?
Yeah. There's no line. There's no line.
So from that perspective,
So
everyone was wondering.
why in the world should I improve mine?
Here if they wanted
I
to.
didn't.
Yeah. Which is really, yeah, the best thing is August, I think. And I can go in the hallway and haul it.
Based on mine.
Yeah, probably.
I will give a holler to the hallway.
Overall.
We're about to get started here.
Well,
That's
so,
related to domination.
That valuation. Applied across the board, but
At least if you-
Do you want to be in charge of this thing? Sure. This slide change? Yeah. Okay. I have to have that, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
And,
I'm sorry, I caught you mid-fight. I'm Chris Leonard.
And mine, I will make mine so. That's fine.
I think we'll be good. I think we're gonna try to get through everything. Yeah, I think we're good.
We're good.
came around to look at your home.
I just want to say hello. Introduce you.
I was, yeah, I'll.
Try to work together.
Of those three that you mentioned, how many of them bottom
New
line?
addition. Are you, so I'm new too. Okay, I'm 8.
So that's another time.
Which is where my letter.
Yeah, no, there's.
You read that?
The one thing was a little,
Yeah, a little almost too short.
yeah.
Oh, sure.
No, we definitely, we should just build a website.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thinking that in my head, it makes it go by.
Yeah, he works
Sure,
here.
yeah.
I'm on
For sure, yeah, we're relooking. Yeah, yeah. That was.
No problem. I wanted to chat with you anyway.
I'm not sure.
I noticed that you don't have your access. Such a business card.
No, please go ahead. Yeah, you're all good.
Have any objections? So I think we can just ask if there's any.
Yeah, she mentioned it. I
And they said something like 75%, as long as the school says, as long as 75% are masked or something.
Oh, okay.
That was her quick explanation.
Okay, I think we're gonna get started, everyone. Just real quick, does anyone object if those of us who are presenting remove our masks? Okay, thank you. We want you to be able to see us. Yeah. Maybe close, it might be a little distracting.
close.
People are walking back and forth. Thank you.
I would say just start. I think he's.
Okay, all right. Well, welcome. Thank you everyone for being here. We're really happy to have you. This is a very important and very timely topic for discussion. We're going to be talking about cooperative homeownership as a solution for Maine's affordability crisis. My name is Hillary Blouse. I spent 10 years working alongside cooperators of limited equity housing co-ops in New York City. And the last couple of years I was in New York, I transitioned into property management of affordable housing. And since I've moved back to Maine, over the last few months, I recently started working for Avesta Housing as a senior property manager. So that's a little bit about me and my background. And I'd like to have my colleagues introduce themselves as well.
First. Okay, so hi, I'm Melissa Molyneux, and I work for the Cooperative Development Institute. I work for, we have 3 programs with the Cooperative Development Institute. We have a housing program, we have a farming program, and we have a business ownership solutions program where we kind of help cooperatives of each one of those realms to form a cooperative and to run long-term. I work for the housing program. It's called the NEROC program. New England Resident-Owned Communities is what NEROC stands for. And we work under the ROC USA model. So I am just nearing my 5 years here at CDI, and I work with 5 of the 10 housing cooperatives here in Maine. And so I'll give it to you.
Thanks. So my name is Liz Trice. I live in Portland, and I'm part of a team called Maine Cooperative Development Partners. And we're actually developing some of the first large-scale limited equity cooperative housing in Maine. Right now, there's the Raise Up in Lewiston, which is, I think once they build it, might be up to 200 units or something. Like, we're going to be building 200 units in Portland, and it's through the city of Portland actually put up land that they said we want middle income housing that's affordable, who can come up with a good plan to develop this. And so I think there's time later to get more details, but I'm working on that. And actually we're excited, like this week, we're actually opening for people who are reserving units. And I've been working on it for a little over 2 years. So I'm excited to be doing that. Thanks.
Chris, you want to introduce yourself?
Oh, sure. I'm Chris Linder with the Cooperative Fund in the Northeast.
So just real quick before we jump into the seminar, there are a couple goals that we have for you things that we want you to walk away with. 3 things: agitation, education, and inspiration. So I think we can all agree that agitation is a prerequisite to get anything done that's worth doing, right? And in this case, the doing is finding creative solutions to Maine's affordable housing crisis. So we really want you to get fired up about what we're facing and how we got here so that you understand the stakes and the role that we all have in terms of righting the ship. Education, we're going to be talking about, we're going to give you a basic intro into what cooperative home ownership is, what housing co-ops are, and what it looks like by highlighting the potential that 2 models have to help alleviate the affordable housing crisis that we are facing in Maine. And finally, inspiration. It's really important to us that you walk out of here knowing what's possible, what's already being done in this space, which Liz alluded to, and armed with next steps to help you to really form coalitions and groups that can take this movement to the next level to really find some creative housing solutions, which is definitely something that we need at this time. Next slide. Oh, thank you. Oh, by the way, this is being recorded, just so everyone knows. So, if you don't have to take notes, you can always go back and reference it. So just to kind of provide some context, clearly we're facing an unprecedented housing crisis here in Maine. It's pretty much nationwide, but those of us who are here are, primarily concerned with what's going on in our state. So I wanted to kind of give you some facts and figures just to kind of set the scene about what we're dealing with. So just a couple things. In December of 2021, Maine's median single-family home sale price was $299,000, a 38% increase over the median price of $216,900 in February of 2020. Among low-income Maine households that rent, more than 40% are rent burdened, which means that they pay over 30% of their income on housing, which leaves little left over for other basic necessities. 58% of Maine households are unable to buy or rent or buy a median price home today. And finally, the Maine Affordable Housing Coalition contends that 1 in 5 renters spends more than half of one's income on housing, and that there are 3 families on a waiting list for every single family in a federally subsidized unit. So that just gives you kind of an overall context about where we are and the problem that we have in front of us to solve. So how did we get here? Obviously, there are a lot of reasons, couldn't talk about all of them in this seminar, but we kind of boiled it down to 3 major ones. So the impact of COVID, outdated land use restrictions and zoning rules, and then the role of policymakers and NIMBYism, not in my backyard-ism. So I just want to talk about those really briefly to, again, provide context for how we got here. So it wasn't just one thing. It wasn't just COVID. It wasn't just, you know, some of these other things that are more gradual, but rather a confluence of the gradual and the acute kind of coming together to create this perfect storm. So COVID really exploited what we love about Maine to drive wealthy transplants here from larger cities who could compete for the limited supply of housing. This drove prices up, further reduced supply, forced families further away from their jobs, and has made it exceedingly difficult for employers to find and attract good employees because of the lack of suitable and affordable housing options nearby to where they work. Outdated land use restrictions and zoning rules. Again, this is another topic that we could really dive into a lot because there are a lot of things that are very outdated and not useful for our purposes, but local zoning rules, minimum lot size requirements for building, chief among them, are a primary cause of these these high and rising housing costs. So when localities require that a house in a zone sit on a large piece of land, they basically limit the amount of housing that can be built in that area and drive up the cost of construction. So large lot zones ban residents who really can't afford to purchase a large tract of land. So this is just one example of how policies in the books make it harder to build more dense, more practical, more affordable housing in our neighborhoods. And finally, the role of policymakers in NIMBYism. So maybe this is something you've come across, but there is a local state conflict really at the heart of the housing crisis. Local policymakers face incentives to restrict the amount of construction that happens within their jurisdictions because of the cost. And we're not just talking about like the financial costs, but people don't want it. People don't want to have to deal with the short-term effects of having to deal with construction going on, the noise, the traffic, all these things, right? But ultimately, the benefits outweigh the costs in the long run. And if state policymakers don't step in more effectively, we essentially have this hot potato of housing construction being passed from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, and nothing effective is getting done and solutions are not happening. So that's kind of to give you an idea of what it is that we're dealing with. Thank you. So I think we can all agree that we're no longer at an impasse. We're beyond that. We're at the point where we have legislators on both sides of the aisle coming together to come up with a solution to this problem. If we want to solve this crisis, we really have to think creatively and employ a multi-pronged solution that involves a lot of different types of stakeholders. We need to think outside of the box, both in terms of the types of housing we build and how that housing is designated. We need more housing, of course, we know that, but we also need to build intentionally with a focus on community building and what makes neighborhoods the kind of neighborhoods that people actually want to live in. This is not just about building more housing, it's about building intentionally. So types of housing that we would like to see, more kind of like townhomes, row homes, manufactured and mobile home communities, rehabbing, like actually taking underutilized buildings, rehabbing them and giving them new life, right? Mixed use buildings, commercial and residential together, and smaller scale development in general. These are things that aren't really being talked about on a large scale. So in our opinion, and I'm speaking for everyone here, the ideal way to designate a lot of this new housing in order to see that what's built brings about the types of communities we want is that it's designated as cooperative housing. So that's what we're here to talk about. And specifically 2 models of which we want to talk to you about today and share why they are both viable solutions to help alleviate this affordability crisis that we're currently facing. So those 2 models that we're going to be talking to you about today are limited equity housing cooperatives and resident-owned communities, or ROCs. So I'll be talking with you about limited equity housing co-ops, and Melissa's going to be sharing with you about ROCs. But first, what is a housing cooperative? So more likely than not, all of you who are familiar with co-ops, who are co-op members, co-op leaders, you already have an idea of what it is. So what we have here is just a very general definition. In a housing co-op, residents, in this case, own shares in the corporation, which owns the physical real estate. They do not own their units outright, like a condo or a single family home, but enter into a long-term lease called a proprietary lease. And there are differences depending on what the model is, as you'll hear. But generally speaking, they have a long-term lease that grants them the right to reside in a particular unit. So in doing so, residents become members of the cooperative. And each year, members nominate and elect one another to the board of directors who manage the organization on behalf of the members. So you can see here, we've listed different types of cooperatives. There are market rate cooperatives, leasing cooperatives, or zero equity cooperatives, where you pay a share, pay for a share, and when you leave, you make the same amount that you invested in it. Resident-owned communities and limited equity cooperatives. So the idea here is just that this definition gets to the crux of the matter, which is that we're talking about housing that is member controlled, or in this case, resident controlled, and they collectively own the physical asset and often the land on which it sits. Okay, so what is a limited equity housing cooperative? So in a limited equity housing cooperative, the initial purchase price, so what you invest to purchase your share in the co-op, is fixed at an affordable amount. So you don't pay a lot to get into a limited equity cooperative, but you're also not making a windfall when you sell either. It's not a zero investment kind of situation. You do make some, and it's usually based on the rate of inflation or some other index that's capped and regulated. But the idea is that in a limited equity co-op, the residents enjoy the benefit of living in the co-op while they're living in it, as opposed to they enjoy the financial benefits while they're living in it, as opposed to when they sell, right? So the idea is that they're going to do that by having a say in the governing of the co-op. They're also able to keep costs low by managing their expenses, and they don't have to deal with a landlord or an investor or anyone like that, or worry that someone's going to come in speculatively try to buy up the land or the housing. And they're able to control their costs with affordable monthly maintenance fees. So that's the idea. So we're talking about a use value model, right? With the actual usefulness of the housing, as opposed to something with an exchange value where it's just, a matter of how much it's worth on the open market. Okay, so now I'd like to invite Melissa up to talk a little bit about resident-owned communities.
Sure. So resident-owned community, and we call them ROCs. So basically, in a ROC, homeowners of a manufactured housing community form a cooperative by incorporating into a not-for-profit business. And we work under the ROC USA model, as you can see down there. So each household is a member of the cooperative, and which owns the land. So the cooperative owns the land and manages the business, and then each household is a member of that business. So members continue to own their own homes individually, and then an equal share of the land beneath their homes, but it's an equal share of the entire land under their homes, so not technically even the land underneath them. As you can see, there are many benefits to living in a ROC. You have control of your monthly lot rent, community repairs and improvements. We find that a lot of folks who get into buying their community as a co-op typically will buy it and with that, they will take on a lot of infrastructure issues that have not been tended to for, you know, if ever. So they're buying a lot of problems that come with it. So, you know, one real big perk of being a member is living in a mobile home community where you are able to put the money that comes in towards the needs of the community rather than giving it to, you know, an owner. Another perk is lifetime security against unfair eviction. We also, the liability protection where members are not personally liable for the association loans. And then a strong sense of community is also a big benefit to living in a ROC. In a ROC, everyone has say in why, in the way that the ROC is run, and major decisions are made by a democratic vote. So once you become a member, you buy into the membership, you have a voting right. So each household has a vote, and then the community and the members get together and vote in a board of directors. The board of directors will run the community, make the decisions, appoint committees to make day-to-day decisions, yeah, and that's pretty much what a ROC is. Back to you.
All right, so I'm sure that all sounds great to you. Limited equity co-ops, right? ROCs. It's a great idea. It's a great model, but why hasn't it caught on yet? What are the obstacles that are facing the cooperative housing movement in Maine? So I think that we already kind of talked a little bit about this earlier in the seminar. We talked about land use regulation, outdated land use regulation, zoning rules, NIMBYism, the role of policymakers, but that's just one side of it. There's also just very practical things like housing construction costs. I mean, I think we all know, we've all heard about the supply chain issues, and just everything in terms of building housing these days has gone up dramatically. So that's something. So just buying land, the cost of land, the development costs associated with this have just, gone up astronomically. In addition to that, in terms of obstacles that we're facing and why this hasn't caught on, there's a lack of education and understanding, really kind of more nuanced understanding about these models at a lot of levels, especially the level of policymakers and people who actually have the power to make these things happen. There's also a high barrier of entry when it comes to housing cooperatives. Folks need to be educated on what they are and how they operate. And it's not just at the beginning, it's through all stages and beyond the conversion of the co-op. They require, and to be successful in most cases, they require a lot of education, ongoing education, technical assistance, training, and things like that, so that they succeed over the long term, because there's just so much nuance in terms of running your own housing cooperative, as you all know, as members of different types of co-ops. Subdivision requirements, we kind of talked about that a little bit when it comes to housing. That's one other obstacle. Lack of political will and advocacy at the state and local level. And really historical precedents. It doesn't really exist on on a very large scale here in Maine, as it does in, on the two coasts, San Francisco, New York specifically, and a spattering here and there throughout the rest of the states in the middle of the country. But so those are some of the things that we're facing and why we are kind of at this place where we are. So how do we overcome these obstacles? So we're actually going to get you guys talking in groups in a few. And I think we have about 26 or 27 of you. So we'll probably break up into maybe, I don't know, four or five groups. But so what we've done so far is we've identified some of the biggest obstacles to the broader adoption of housing cooperatives as a statewide solution to the affordable housing crisis. we're gonna break you up into small working groups to brainstorm what methods could be used to overcome these obstacles and what that might look like in practice. We're gonna be utilizing the small group activity method. So this is a method that's based on adult learning theory that adults learn better by doing. So you don't wanna just sit there and listen to me talk at you. The way that you're gonna really grasp this and take something tangible home with you to implement in your communities is by actually, breaking out into working groups and coming up with some ideas on your own. And we as facilitators have a lot to learn from you as well. So we've actually taken some time to write down the obstacles that we discussed here on the board, so you don't have to, remember what they were. And we were originally thinking we were going to assign each group an obstacle, but we kind of want to see what you guys come up with on your own. And we figure if all the groups or most of the groups choose one, that's clearly the most, that's clearly the one that requires the most brainstorming and workshopping. So that would be good to know. So once you guys break up into your groups, and I'll have Chris and Liz help out with the logistics of that, we're just going to ask that you identify a reporter from your group, appoint a reporter who can just report back to the larger group when we come back together after this session to share the ideas that you come up with. And we're going to write everything down on these boards, so you can at the end take photos and take it all with you, and you guys take it from there. But I just want to make a point that while there may be a lot working against us, there are pioneering efforts afoot, as you heard from Liz. So before we break out, I would really like to invite Liz to come up and talk a little bit more about her team and the work that they're doing in Portland to create these limited equity housing cooperative communities. So please, Liz, take it away.
I'm putting cards because I wish I had given some slides because we have some really pretty pictures now. But I'll just pass this and take one if you want. If you don't, just leave them on the table so I'll pop them. Let's see. So the city of Portland is concerned about affordable housing. Did a survey of all of the properties that were city owned and asked staff to think about which might be appropriate for housing. And specifically, they wanted to address middle income housing, which they call workforce housing, the income levels in Cumberland County. So it's so low income housing, tax credit, subsidized housing is usually for people who make 60% of area median income or below. So in Portland, that's a family who are making $60,000 or below. And then obviously people making like $120,000 or more are fine. So they were really interested in what they call middle income housing. So that's for family for like $60,000 to $120,000. So they surveyed all the city owned properties and picked 4 that they thought were appropriate. And then they created a request for proposals, an RFP, and said, which they released about 2 weeks before the shutdown for the pandemic. They didn't even release it, they released the draft. And, I had been organizing people around, lots of things. I mean, I studied public policy and I wrote about housing and tried to understand ownership options for changing demographic groups like single people, and had been writing about the need to change zoning and land use and participate in my local YIMBY group, which is Yes, We Want Housing group. And I'd also been hanging out with some friends who wanted to create co-housing, and I've visited probably 20 co-housing developments around the country and done trainings in being a developer and have worked for other developers. And so some of the people that I've been talking to said, let's work on this together. Let's put together a proposal. And one of my partners grew up in a co-op in New York City and is on the board of UHAB, the same organization that Hillary worked for. And so, my co-housing group had come to the conclusion that if we wanted diverse incomes, we should go limited equity cooperative. That was the conclusion that we had already come to. So, and the city wanted age inclusive, mixed income housing. And that was kind of all they said. Well, and it should be green and a couple other things. So we put together a proposal. I spent about 300 hours working on the proposal and got another 35 people to put in another 600 hours combined. So we put in like 1,000 hours, which I learned later, property developers don't usually do that until they already have control of a property. But I didn't know that, and we did it. And the short answer is we won 3 of the 4 properties and got them at very, very inexpensive prices. And so now we're a thing, you know, now it's happening. We were able to get pre-development investing, which is really important. I mean, like, you know, like you need like at least, you know, like on a $20 million project, you need at least $1 million to spend before you even know if you're going to be allowed to build something. So, so we've been able to get some lending from both organizations that specifically do this. Some we got a family foundation that gave us some very favorable terms for some money. We put in a little bit of our own money, and so we're moving along. So there's one that's close to downtown Portland. It's Douglas Street with Doherty Fields, where like there's already a recreation, multiple soccer fields and a swimming pool and a skate park. And then the other location is 25 acres of wooded land in North Deering, very close to Falmouth and very close to a highway. So there's going to be we're going to conserve like 80% of that, more than that. We're only developing like 5 out of 25 acres. And so one project is already going through planning board. So we'll have planning board approvals in like a month to 6 weeks maybe for one. And then the other one we haven't put in our planning application. So it's maybe five months behind. And we just made live on our website the reservation process for people to start getting their names in. So that's the basics. But I guess what I will say is just something I'm really excited about, and it doesn't have to do with the mechanics, but you know, having a background in land use and caring about community and being a pedestrian activist, we've put a ton of time into how is this community going to feel? We're building a whole neighborhood. So I want a place where parents feel comfortable letting their kids run out the front door and disappearing for an hour and a half. And what does that need to look like? So we got all the cars out of the middle of the community and off to one side. We're building it so that even if you have a townhome on the very edge of the community, you have to go into one of the common spaces to get your mail. And we're building in so that we have 3 different building types. One is townhomes, so 2-story, 3-bedroom townhomes. One is what we're calling row homes, which is essentially the first floor is a 1-bedroom unit. Second and third floor is a 3-bedroom townhome. But then we have these 10-unit buildings where on the first floor you have like a social lobby, probably, you know, about this size, with like a little station where you can collect your mail, get some tea, have a seat, you know, moms can hang out with their kids during the day. And then each of those social lobbies has a function room off the side. So like on the bigger development where we'll have 10 of those buildings, at least 7 of them will have a function room that then you can say, let's make one into a gym. Let's make one into a toddler playroom. Let's make one into a music room or whatever the community wants. And you also have, and then we also built in guest rooms. So those 10-unit buildings so we might have 7 guest rooms on a large site. So I'm really excited about those community elements, because I think it's really important to have physical community elements that support, that line up with like the financial and governance community elements. I could talk for a long time about this, but I'm going to stop. But we're good on time, actually. Really? We're doing okay. Yeah, we're doing what else would I tell you? So we're starting marketing now. I will say financing is not easy. So we have a member of our team who's a very, very skilled project developer. He was like vice president of development for Avesta for 10 years. Well, he was there for 10 years. And like the cool thing that we're doing, so no bank in its right mind will say, here's $20 million. And when you're done building it, just turn it over to whatever 60 people you want. Don't worry about it. You know, we trust it'll work out all right. So we're using a program called HUD 213, which is essentially they guarantee a loan from a commercial bank. And so they have a lot of process and paperwork that goes through that. So we're wading through that, and it's not for the faint of heart. So that's something that, like, you know, if and you have to have a project that has at least like 40 units to do that. And so having somebody who's a project manager who can keep all the budgets and timelines and knows how Maine housing or HUD works is a really good thing. And hopefully, I mean, our hope is that we're successful with this in Portland where the rents are really high. And then, because we've had about 20 communities reach out to us saying, we want this in our community. And we're like, well, you know, we don't know if we can do this like in Skowhegan because the construction costs are going to be the same, but rents are going to be lower. We need to make it work, you know, one place before we go somewhere else. So, but we're hoping that then maybe Maine Housing will say, oh, we want to support cooperatives, which they haven't done yet. They support building affordable condos and they support like middle income condos and they support low income housing, but they haven't supported cooperatives yet. Let's see, what else? Any other, just could you just take a few questions about this?
Yeah, like maybe 5 minutes and then we'll do our breakout session.
Yeah, what would be helpful for people to hear about? Yes.
So given that the unit is built and ready for occupancy.
No, it's not built. Nothing's been built.
When it is.
Okay, yes.
What is the entry level for the residents?
Sure. So the city of Portland is requiring us, so 100% of units have to be affordable to households making 100% or less. So in Cumberland County, that's a family of four, $100,000, which means the monthly charges, including all utilities, can't be more than a third of what a family of four making $100,000 a year makes. The share price upfront, we don't know because we're hoping it could be on the low side, like $5,000. And so just, you know, so share price, it's kind of like a down payment. But if and when you leave in 20 years, you get that back with some amount of interest, depending on how the co-op manages itself. It could be as high as $20,000 or more because the thing is we're capped at what we can charge per month to people. And we can't control interest rates and we have some control, but not endless control over construction costs. So like right now, if we're looking at like $240 a square foot, if we want a $1,000 apartment, you know, that means $240,000 just to build it. And then there's like usually another 20 to 30% of soft costs, what we call. So, you know, so it's not cheap. So we won't know till later in the process what that share price is going to be. The city of Portland requires that 25% of our units be affordable to households making 80% of the area median income. So for a family of four, that means making $80,000 or less. And we're setting up our prices so that those 80% units will be affordable to people who hold Section 8 vouchers. So it's not crazy cheap. You know, there will be households paying up to, you know, low 2000s for a big unit, but it includes all utilities, you know, and it's more, you know, but when you compare to new construction apartments or housing in Portland, it's very reasonable. Yeah. Yes.
Who have you seen or spoken to that's like a model or an inspiration that you're?
Well, you know, they manage like 25,000 units of limited equity cooperatives in New York. So they give us a lot of like faith that, you know, it's a real thing. But honestly, there's been some, I think, changes at the federal level that made a lot built in a certain time era and then not some. And now there's a bunch being built again. So it's more like there's a bunch of people in the same stage of the process as we are. And then I think in terms of design, there's a lot of different inspiration. Like I've taken a lot of inspiration from co-housing and my partners have different perspectives as well, like the different things that have inspired them. Does that help? Yes.
So this theoretically is affordable housing. How are you keeping the cost of construction at a certain level and the cost of each individual contracted position and all that? Are you restricting who you're using as far as contractors for doing the different pieces?
So we haven't chosen our final contractor yet. It's a little bit later in the process. We are talking with like some big, we have a contract who might be our contractor, but right now they're like our contractor consultant kind of. And so we've been meeting with some suppliers of wood, for example, to say, hey, if we can commit to buying from you several, a year in advance. Can we lower the price, or can we nail down a price and hold to it so that, because they said often what happens is like the bank closes, you get your contractor, and then boom, the contractor is calling somebody and saying, hey, can you get me, $2 million of wood next, how many weeks, how soon? And so that's not a good system for anyone. So we're trying to plan ahead and make some of those relationships so that we can keep costs controlled. We're planning, hoping to build passive house, which means that it's a little bit more expensive up front, but it means that you have almost no heating costs for the life of the building. Like your electric heating can be covered by your solar panels, like what your solar panels create, which is amazing. So we're really excited about that. And considering that people are expecting to be living here, some people will stay for generations. That's what happens. There's no, unlike when you buy a condo, when you're living in a cooperative, there's no financial incentive to get up and leave. Like you don't get to cash out, take your $100,000 in equity and go buy something else. So people, you can pass on the low costs you have to future generations. So we hear stories of people like, yeah, my grandfather worked with your grandmother. We're still living in the same cooperative. So the depth of community connections that happen is unprecedented in any other type of neighborhood type. People talk about the stability of the single family neighborhood, but like that doesn't happen in single family neighborhoods typically. So we're excited about that. Yes.
What kind of partnerships, if they're accessible to you, do you have with local governments around like funding specifically for the accessibility model? I'm a founding member of a housing co-op in Ithaca, New York. Oh, wow. And we were able to make it affordable, and it's a small co-op with 4 houses, and one of those houses is affordable at the 80% median income level, like in perpetuity, because we were able to get money from like Better Housing of Tompkins County and Ithaca Neighborhood Housing Services, which is a NeighborWorks America group. And I wonder, like, what kind of access do you have to those groups, and how can they, like, what can individuals do to tap into some of those existing resources?
Sure. So something I forgot to mention is 100% of our units are permanently affordable. That's the idea. So that is built in, cannot be changed. That's what it is. So that's already there. And I should also just say affordable has kind of 2 definitions in our world. So one means something is affordable to you if it doesn't cost more than 30% of your income. And you may not feel that way. You might be like, oh my God, anything more than 20% is unaffordable. But that's like the official definition. And then, oftentimes when people say affordable housing, they mean subsidized projects for people who make under 60%. So there's kind of 2 definitions floating around. So in terms of partnerships and funding, so the thing that we knew we could get all along, and we just applied for, I spent all week working on this, is tax increment financing from the city. And I think every town in the state has the option of doing this. Whether or not they've elected to do it, they might have to have an ordinance in place. But essentially they can say, well, look, here's a vacant lot. We're not getting any tax money from it, and we really want housing. So if you build the type of housing we want, we'll give you back 75% of your property taxes for like 30 years. And then you can take that to the bank. You can get what is called a credit enhancement agreement, and you can actually get that and borrow more money because you know you're going to get that money back. The other thing is City of Portland has something called the Housing Trust Fund. So anytime people remove housing, take it off the market, or don't build the inclusionary units that are required, they have to put money into this fund. So we just applied for about $2 million. There's other people applying for that money too, so we don't know, but we're hopeful. And we also put in a grant request for about the same amount of money from the Cumberland County ARPA funds. So every county in the state got ARPA money, and our county decided that housing was the top priority. So we didn't get funded in their first round in February because we didn't have our permitting yet. We were supposed to do a second round in June or July, and that money is there. There's also funds like Chris's CFNE, there's an organization called LEAF, there's Genesis Community Loan Fund, who have missions specifically to fund housing. So they're essentially friendly lenders, lenders who don't ask for huge amounts of collateral, who don't charge huge interest rates, and who want us to succeed, so that's been very helpful.
Yeah, I think we should probably cap it there. There'll definitely be time at the end for discussion and more questions, but thank you so much for sharing that. I'm sure everyone feels inspired. But of course, this is just one project. And so we want to see more of this happening, not only in Portland, but across the state. So we would love it if you guys could self-break out into about, what did we say, 4 or 5 groups?
5 groups.
5 groups of 5. There might be a couple stragglers that might need to join. But we want to see what you can come up with in terms of conquering these obstacles and giving us all some more ideas about how we can help to, make a dent in this affordable housing crisis that we're all facing. So.
And, I think some idea we could have is like maybe the 2 of you could turn around and work with these 3.
Yeah.
Maybe you 3 could turn around and work with these 3, and then over here the same. And then, well, that would make it. And then maybe we could pull you guys into some of these, or actually, no, you could form one yourself.
We can huddle them here if you're up for it.
Yeah, that's all right. And if there's too many, like this happening. So like, if the 3 of you want to turn around, what do you guys do? No. Well, unless they want to big, I was just trying to get them to have them.
Support community.
You're welcome. Yeah, they're fine. Yeah.
So just don't forget to choose a reporter who's gonna be reporting back on behalf of your group, or just remember and recall.
I like that.
You were just off the cuff.
Great. I'm always happy to go, but I already asked questions, so I don't want to take too much.
Yeah.
I think that financing is the
live there.
The reservation thing is like live as of today, so you can just go in.
Financing, whether it be construction costs or like down payments required, kind of like, how do we, more like, where do we go? Housing cooperative involves extra layers of information and stuff, all of this together for Facebook. Making costs associated with our posts.
Yes, so we haven't officially started putting it live. So like,
Can I get your card?
just something in the next week. Not this week, next week.
Yeah.
But so it's live, we haven't actually started promoting that makes sense.
Okay, so where would we go?
Yeah, so
Technical assistance.
What did you say?
Do a whole bunch of stuff and
Just something similar. California, and now Maine, trying to pass it to the entire state of Maine. That was really democratic and
they want to see that you're.
I think it does. I don't. Yeah, the housing looks like it's good. I don't know about
Is that what you're saying?
Well, it's good. Definitely housing that's really expensive, that's available. There's also just mistrust in the system. And there might be some underutilized buildings. Some communities have come up with really creative solutions to use that, but you know, every community situation is a little different. So I just ideas that are out there.
Are you getting
And they
the
want to
support
make
you
it work.
back?
If that particular town does not have the right ratio for affordable housing, that is set by the state of Massachusetts.
So it's just
What's happening is allowing
We feel our money we didn't have, or
one more
economy, great guidance. Where we give a max support. You know,
We're currently disappointed that they're not providing.
So it's kind of like,
At this point, I would say the land use hasn't yet presented itself as a problem. Maybe coming later.
you know, and then it's finding that balance.
Oh, yeah.
Answers up there, but we gotta figure out what to
And I got voted over, which is kind of weird in the site was in there 2 months. So it goes to show nobody wants to move. Nobody wants to step up.
We're 9 months into it.
So
Yeah, so housing construction.
So we all love
has certainly been a topic.
but like you said, there's a giant level. So it was terrifying when I saw the number.
Make sure people know that they have to sign a reminder.
Legislation. For us, just being new, I don't have as much understanding. I would add on to that. But any type of part, land requires
Residents. Like,
and to find someone like specialized or understands
all kind of sounds like they want to do something.
finding like a workflow knowledge between multi-owner contracts for land. For me, I don't know. I just I feel very so I feel be reporting out after. I don't mean to interrupt.
That's just been solved.
We had out.
Going to
Oh, absolutely. No. Add away. Yep, as much as you can come up with. Or we wanted to put some there just because of some this year, you know. Yeah. As much as you want to figure out. I know my own. We have already recording and that we'll be recording out later. And you come up with models, so you don't have to sit a lot of my clients are going people look down on it. They're nice neighborhoods, they're my community, and we have certain height.
Right.
You know, you didn't ask the board, that's all you gotta do. That's the one where the dad, here's what my plan is, like play, guarantee, what you don't know why we're like that, no, you didn't setting that, this is your. You know, we go on $1 right? You know,
And that's gonna be the care.
It's a really nice park, actually, you know, we have good people. Yeah, and we're going to like the communication, you know, those next to us, you have the French and accent, you know,
And they're just treating them, you know, like.
see how you guys are doing, and it's like when I hear their dog bark, I mean, you know, sometimes I'm joking, it is like, It's nice to know we've got.
Every project is different outside of like the rock. It also works if you have a group of people that are all like.
Right, it's not.
To do it, fun. You had so many people step up, right? To say, okay, we're gonna learn how to do it, we're gonna serve on the boards. And just a lot of. Yeah, I mean, I remember those early meetings, you know, and like, but when people were behind it, you had support and everyone moved in the same direction, right? So that's what it is.
Right, we were laughing about living in front of, like, I don't know if you guys have been in that area, but we've definitely been fine. Like, branch and then somewhere in the middle. And there's these like really wealthy neighborhoods going up. I'm in
Because that also creates a situation of and then there's gonna be a sale, you have a group that's ready.
and I'm sorry about it, but I think
Existing houses. There is, usually that window is. It does.
But I know people who are open to doing it, they don't have a pathway. Like, not an application.
I have an email with your boss that are not working.
Here's the kind of projects
Stuff just.
Yeah.
We really, and then just like last 2 weeks, we got awarded new funding stuff, and that's really why.
But probably it's probably got to do from New York funding projects and more about grants loans, or is it?
You could go old and gray sitting.
Oh, yeah, most of our communities older people.
Worse than instead of water. They're like, oh yeah.
And that's why I mentioned costs first, because yes, like education.
So they're finally just saying
They're so important. We have a
affordable function at our age, right? Like we have money, and even the 40-year-olds, they're like without the money to come by, you drive around and you're like, and so I think, so they're all like long-term residents.
I mean, I'm not, I think we're supposed to talk about some potential solutions to these problems. I don't know what the solution is. Especially in the past couple of years, like building so there's so much of this financial aspect.
Like from like.
Yeah, so with money, exactly. It wouldn't happen without that.
I would love to start organizing. That's really the way to like to get the ball rolling.
Find a way to
Piecing it all together and got like $1 million donation as part of it. Like, oh,
Yeah.
I don't have the right.
So what about creating a mix stuff? Like you have a house project and one of the issues is transportation. Can't you have a project with that, so on there?
And I'll say.
You could bring in some business money.
We did it.
Something down.
Okay, if I need to, I can, but not, if I need to, I can.
We're a little down about summer, but it won't have been the same when hopefully we're more insulated. Ours is 5 years old.
So do we have any solutions?
Hasn't even had and we're like, I don't know what people are talking about. It's the first one that doesn't have a draft.
Yeah, right.
I mean, I'm like,
If you're in trouble.
you know.
There's a lot of opinions in there.
Yeah, it is.
With the energy college-based economy is like.
This is something that, you know. Okay, about 4 more minutes of discussion. And don't forget to appoint a reporter from your group, please.
Oh, yeah. And
I'm gonna offer to hang out instead of trying to go to another session. I'm just gonna offer to hang out for anybody who wants to come talk about it. Cool. That's more valuable. I think so too. Sitting sessions. Yeah, I don't really want to. Yeah, I'll go with you.
I see structure, a viable structure.
Or is it just because we're presenting? I don't know, my arm is I'm sweating. Yeah, I'm like, these things generate a lot of grief too.
Not in my backyard.
It's the same situation. They own the ability to have a house there. They have to be built by that.
Not this specifically, but I had to just, when I got hired, I had to disclose like the work I'm doing. And they discussed it at a higher level.
It's very restricted and it's legal.
So that's essentially homeowners have your team.
It's a little.
Minnesota.
Yeah.
One of the meetings that I took was.
Well, he subsidized housing. We were saying stigma, yeah.
Awareness. Well, so raise up dealing with that. It's like,
I know that it's still
They don't have money.
I forgot how to like it.
So we haven't trying to hurry to come up with a meeting.
I think that would.
Which form of governance. So one person I talked to recently.
Well, I mean,
Maine housing will do. They have a single family ownership. Turns out like very. Condo association. So we talked about like, and it's $60,000 grant per unit. You're gonna build like, a lot of living.
like anybody now is like right in our pocket.
Starting in the business side of things, but then allowing the residential people, so employees could actually, who are only making
1 more minute.
an hour or whatever, even have kind of subsidized housing.
And again, they could just simplify
You know, and then having
density bureaucratic.
loans or whatever, like the other way. That's why like this conference, even like how to have the cooperative.
It's gonna get noticeable to the back. Roads and because in our area, community concepts.
I think that like we don't have I can't wait to hear what happens.
The goal there is. There's a possibility.
Nice we've been talking for a month about.
We're gonna bring it back to the larger group now, and you'll have a chance to share what you've been discussing in your smaller groups. So we're really excited to hear this.
We'll see each other on the 14th.
Joe and I live apart.
Yeah.
First thing I thought.
He's taking the lead on it. Just check.
All right, is there a group that would like to go first?
I was one.
Sure.
She has to leave early, so.
All right, we can just give our attention to this first group in the front, please.
Our group did spend a decent amount of the time just like digging into understand the obstacles a little more with examples from the experiences of the people in our group. So in terms of solutions, they're not easy, but one thing that was talked about was before incorporating as a certain type of co-op or one as a nonprofit, they talked about like reading the fine print and understanding the landscape of like, oh, if we incorporate as this, we'll have access to these resources. Now that's like the way to work with a broken system. The real solution would be if the system were aligned so that it didn't matter the structure of the co-op or the, like also with banks and lending, it might be harder to get a loan as a housing co-op rather than as a bunch of individuals. So like, especially if it's in startup phase and there's not a lot of equity to balance it out. So we did talk about that and just like how to navigate it and like set an individual project up for the most resources before it gets too deep in. Yeah, did anyone else from the group want to add? I feel like that was the majority of mine over about.
Yeah, because some of what she's saying is some of the different funding groups that may be funding help offset some of the funding other than the individuals putting in their own money to purchase that unit, that you may be offsetting it with groups like, SBA or HUD or these different groups they have certain qualifications, can either only loan certain programs to either nonprofits or for-profits or individuals. So there's different lending qualifications depending on your legal structure of how your paperwork is. So getting a co-op recognized as its own entity versus like a sole proprietor or corporation or a nonprofit versus profit.
Got it. Great. Anything else from your group?
Maybe to add just something and just sort of like a very ideal sort of solution that it's something that would probably take a lot of time to actually fabricate. But if the state of Maine had some sort of process where it was really easy for a cooperative to be formed in any form, any type of cooperative, and then had a process where they could receive funding that was tax deductible. And if that process was made a lot easier by the state, I think that would.
Great.
Can I just add on the point Robin hit on about the funding challenges that cooperative face, and what we thought could be a possible solution was to work with banks and set up skills development in the banks and the lending institutions so that they have the underwriting processes which are really aligned to the needs of cooperatives, because most of the lending institutions have these traditional lending underwriting tools, which are not necessarily designed to capture the cooperatives' risk, processes. So helping banks or probably advising them that this is a need that you can really tap into and help cooperatives to borrow money from your coffers. I think that would be something that would help.
Great.
Before we close our team, there's another point which we didn't discuss, but because we are still fed up with the obstacles. I think we have an obstacle of limited number of units that are owned by cooperative organizations. My proposal would be, we have many units in the state of Maine, which are owned by development organizations, which are initially incorporated as non-profit organizations. Mm-hmm. Why wouldn't those organizations turn out to those units to be owned by tenants? Mm-hmm. Like speak with those organizations which develop those units on the funding of the state or federal funds, encourage them to say, hey, okay, if you have rented with us for 5 years, are you interested in owning this unit, this property, and then help them to own it and as a cooperative, instead of them owning those units forever, them meaning the development, non-profit organizations. Or
so the idea is a nonprofit handing over the opportunity to purchase to tenants.
You get it. So
that live in the building that they own.
Yeah, like a Vesta, which owns over 200 or 2.
I would love it if we did home ownership like that.
Say every year we look at tenants who have been really very nice, paying well, behaving well, you have like a checklist, and we reach out to them and we ask them if they want to own. Mm-hmm. Instead of being tenants forever, we ask them if they want to form a cooperative and own this property. Mm-hmm. And then work out the numbers, move on to develop another area, but that one gets off from your books. Mm-hmm. Probably hand it over to Liz to
now you're an investor, who knows what
instead of spending 100 years trying to develop new units, which have land restriction issues, which have funding restriction issues. What about those ones which we have right now, which are owned in a different form?
Yeah, awesome, great. Okay, which group would like to report back next? Thank you very much, by the way. Okay, great, thank you.
We also spent a lot of time talking about individual obstacles over a lot of solutions, but I think a lot of them kind of tie back. So like a lot of having to do with subdivision laws, stigma behind like low-income housing or like mobile homes especially, lack of education, and financial barriers, but also like the history behind the reason why these stigmas and barriers exist, which I think kind of all tie together. Like if we increase education on the history of land ownership and understanding why a lot of low-income areas have to exist in the first place, you could kind of understand the things as a whole. I really like a lot of the ideas that this group came up with. I think a lot of those are really solid. Setting up resources and offsetting funding. And like the banks, I think that's a huge one. Yeah, we are going through the process right now of trying to, we just got incorporated and we're trying to like get a bank account and all this stuff. And as 20-year-olds, it's like hard to navigate like getting lawyers and stuff. And it'd be nice if we could just talk to a bank for free about a lot of these issues.
Yeah. Great.
No. Yeah, if you guys want to contribute at all.
Yeah, anything else from your group?
I think it was also just some of the teammates, along with education, just the resources in general is like, where do you even look? Some of our team feels, young and not even like aware of like, what are the options so I can live in the preferred town I want to live in. And I didn't even know that's an option to go to a co-op. You know what I mean? Like, where do I find the money for that? How do I even find a community for that? So it's kind of, I think that falls under the education, but just to that point of some people don't even literally know where to be, like, where do you even begin on that? If you don't know if it's an option,
Yeah. Great. Anything else from your group? Covered it? Okay, great. Thank you so much. Next. Oh.
So we talked about a couple things, also like individual obstacles. First one we talked about was kind of like zoning issues. And somebody brought up that there's a Senate bill to be passed in the Maine Senate, which would usurp local zoning laws to allow a certain number, I think it was four people to live in each building. And so that could be a workaround for like local zoning issues.
Does anyone, sorry to interrupt, does anyone know what that bill is called, the name of the bill or the number, so we could like put it on the board for reference?
No, I can look it up though.
Okay. Thank you.
Didn't inspect a bill and didn't he gut it in opposition in committee? I feel like it came out of like some organization that said, here are all these things you can do to implement. And then a bunch of it was about antagonism between state and local policymakers. And almost everything's out of it at this point.
Is it the LD 2003 that's been talked about too?
I can't remember the name, but yeah, to build 4 residential units on a property.
That's still in the bill.
Yeah.
Like
it was in the bill a few weeks ago, but it cut that.
when you build a mother-in-law apartment over your single-family home garage.
And you Hampshire recently passed that as well, by right for you.
Okay, so I guess that obstacle. Okay, I guess next one, Bear, you had an idea about a second home tax, which would, the money from that would go to cooperatives. I'm not sure which problem that would. Maybe housing construction costs, high barrier of entry level. And the message is important. The money is important, but the message is also important to promote the sharing of resources and stuff like that. Let's see. There's also not enough education in Belfast. I guess that's something I would do. And then the final one we talked about was kind of the barrier of entry, specifically in education and finances, which Nick brought up. And it's difficult to find a space, and it's even more difficult to build capital to get a place. And so a solution to that could be like start the business side of the co-op. Does that make sense? And feel free to jump in if I'm butchering this.
I can jump in on that one. The idea was just for like a lucrative grocery cooperative to purchase a house.
Yeah.
And then so that you're starting to move across from start with a business cooperative and use that to finance a residential cooperative that could benefit maybe the employees of the cooperative to then have low cost living, so that it's kind of subsidized by the grocery business, so they could build up assets to then get their own house. So kind of a P6 principle.
I actually had someone suggest that we take our project to Maine Health because they're having trouble housing healthcare workers in our area. It would be a potential partner.
That's really great. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, a lot of landlords are contacting the area hospitals and telling them if they've got a unit available and they like them as a short term, being like a 6 month for a visiting nurse or a visiting doctor. And the landlords like it because it's guaranteed income every month, because that person's going to be there for 6 months. And it's going to be a reliable person technically because they're working and in a good profession. So it's a win-win for everybody.
Right. Anything else from your group? Great, thank you so much. Okay, our final group.
So I will try and abbreviate and edit so it doesn't go too long. We started off saying that we thought that access to financing and capital was probably one of the biggest barriers. Although the conversation also went fairly quickly into technical assistance and advice on how to do things because of the complexities of not just the financing, but transactions in general. We had a contrast within the group between projects which were driven by urgency and necessity, which were, the sort of manufactured home community rock conversion, and a more general desire to have cooperative housing. And we observed that urgency seems to be a good focusing factor, particularly if there is a model around which you can work. Because the levels of complexity get very difficult to deal with otherwise. I think most of the comments on how to reduce the levels of complexity look to government or larger organizations in some shape or form. There was some conversation about whether or not banks could be persuaded to do things differently. I'll editorialize and say, having spent a lot of my working life in this area, that's not an easy thing to do. And I think that, I think there was a feeling that, the cost was prohibitive in many cases because of the cost of capital. And we had a brief conversation about whether or not you had to match your project to the financing available, or whether you came up with the ideal project and then try to find financing for it. And then the first made it easier. I think that was about it. I don't know if there are any.
To add to that, the obstacle really, one of the big obstacles we discussed is momentum. How do you get from a bunch of people sitting around saying, yeah, this is a good idea, to then you actually have it? And it's a long slog, as I'm sure you folks are aware.
Yeah, and I'd add to that the piece of, even when there's momentum, even if there's financing, finding the right peripheral support, like lawyers who know how to draft housing cooperative bylaws. And obviously, banks are like a big one, but there are so many players, planning boards that might not be as equipped with knowledge around cooperative land ownership, stuff like that. There's many players in the system, and most of them are undereducated around the cooperative model.
That access to guidance.
Yeah.
Okay, so guys, does anyone have anything in general that they want to share?
Another solution would be that emails sent to employees at Maine Housing are returned. And that their programs actually invite solutions from co-ops.
Yeah, that would be great.
Submit to them unless you're organized in a different way.
Yeah, right. Can I just general comment? I'm sorry, totally dropped out for 10 minutes to talk to the organizers of the conference, so I apologize. But I was on the Burlington, Vermont Development Review Board for 7 years. And in that time, the city saw the biggest development it's ever seen since like the 1800s. And Vermont Housing Conservation Board funded and developed a cooperative, Bright Street Co-op, right? And Cass was over there in Burlington with me at the time, being buddies in the neighborhood. And the VHCB really didn't think the city would approve it, like the DRB, because there was a lot of pushback, a little bit of NIMBYism and stuff like that, right? And it was very high density, but there was no pushback, no multiple hearings. It got passed without any issues. And I remember VHCB, the executive director, Gus, being like, we really didn't think that would happen. So it's just sometimes unexpected stuff happens. If it's delivered in a way that's digestible for the community.
I think another thing that's maybe not cooperative specific, but just affecting housing availability is like short-term housing or like Airbnb, travel housing. And there's I don't know what that passed, like what the bill was exactly, but there's something that was passed to like limit the amount of, like you have to live in the residence for amount of time or something along those lines on Mount Des Island.
But I think that's something we're gonna have to feel like a lot more regulation on as far as solutions. That's something I just like feel like it has to be through the government.
Yeah. Yes.
I wanted to support Pat. She was explaining the challenge of talking to legislators, and she's working hard about having tenants of manufactured home communities have right of refusal when it goes for sale. And yeah, there's a way we can all shout to the legislators louder together to make them hear that. That seems really
a home phone number, which would be appreciated.
I think there's legislation in New York right now for that. I think it's called TOPA, Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act, something like that.
And other states have it.
Yeah.
Maine just needs it.
Yeah.
It'll be a slow crawl, but we'll get there.
We call it either opportunity to purchase is what we're really hoping for, the OTP.
Yeah.
Sorry, this is so scattered. I hope everyone can take a picture of it and understand what I was.
Anything else? They said it was okay if we went over by a couple minutes, but is there anything else?
I had a question for you about your projects, and do you have any forethought for how the cooperative model is going to get passed on to tenants who are maybe new to be living in cooperative?
That's why we pay her. So basically, the idea is that everybody gets training. And so the initial group of people will get trained, and new people as they come in will have like periodic orientations, and there will be capacity building, once a year or something. Like, we don't know exactly what it will be. But
yeah, no, and obviously that's not like a permanent solution. I'm only one person, but the idea would be that the residents would have access to ongoing education, and the group would continue to seek out folks who can help with ongoing education, and just creating like a coalition of technical assistance providers for co-ops. And there are just lots of great people across the state, as this is a perfect example of, and there's so much knowledge. It's just about finding it and connecting people with one another. Yeah.
To build off of that, like, how do people find these when they move to these places? I know, like, when I'm moving to a new city, it's mostly like podcasts or whatever online resource. So how do you like kind of spread the knowledge of make this accessible to everybody?
I mean, for this initial rollout, I have relationships with pretty much every housing organization in the area. So I'm going to reach out through them. I honestly don't know how much turnover there's going to be. And it might be that there's a waiting list because one unit turns over every 6 or 12 months or something. And so I'm not sure if there will be a lot of active promotion if there's a waiting list. And in my mind, if there's a long waiting list, then we need to build another one, Something I wanted to say, just a couple things that came up in the ideas thing. I think with construction costs, I've heard a lot of people say that we don't have enough encouragement of people going into the trades, like encouraging high school students to go into the trades. And there's a shortage, so that drives up costs. In terms of starting small, like, we are not starting small. What we're doing is like not. So like one of the easier things to do would be like 5 single people to go buy a house together, or 3 households to buy a triple unit together. And that's legally and financially really simple. There's we were saying, like, the classes, the places that offer home ownership do not provide technical assistance to help you do that, but it's not actually that complicated. Like, 4 people can walk into a bank together and say, we want to buy a duplex. Like, so that can be done. I want to say I have experience with policy advocacy in Portland. We got 2 things changed last year, which are huge. We basically got parking requirements removed for new housing. So it used to be that you couldn't build housing because there wasn't enough room for both the housing and the parking. It was requiring twice as much real estate to be spent on the parking as on the housing, which is really offensive to me. And then we also got accessory dwelling units passed. So now in Portland, anything that has a single unit on it can build 2 more. without any special permit. I mean, you need a building permit, but you don't need like a special, you don't need to go through planning board. So that's exciting. I wanted to promote and give Thumbs a minute in 3 weeks, collaborative living conference here in Belfast that Thumbs is organizing. Thumbs, do you want to say just a word about that?
Yeah, I would, absolutely. I'd love to have people there. It's particularly focused on people trying to take their cooperative skill set into the residential sphere. And so whether that's just living with your housemates and wanting to understand better how to do that successfully, everything from that till we'll have groups of people there trying to buy 100 acres together and create, farming cooperatives. And so this is all about how to take the cooperation into your daily life.
So that's April 23rd, Saturday, here in Belfast at the Boat House, Belfast Boat House. And that website is www.collaborativeliving.me.
I'm gonna write it down on the board.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Okay, so then I also want to tell you, those of you who love Build Maine, is June 9th in Skowhegan. And that's a day-long conference that is absolutely wonderful, innovative, incremental building from all over the country. And so I highly recommend that, especially if you're interested in like infill housing or building new. Build Maine, June 9th, Skowhegan. So, I mean, those are the two things, those are the two conferences that I'm most excited about and I'm recruiting all my friends to go to. Last,
I just want to say one thing before people leave. We have a sign-up sheet here at the front of the room. So if you want to just jot down your email, I'm sure we'll get a list going. I think we want to keep this momentum going. So if you don't mind sharing your email address with us, we really appreciate it.
And last, Hillary and I are both here for the next hour. So I think there's something happening in here. So we're just going to go hang out in the atrium space and we're happy to hang out and just answer questions or whatever. And same with technical assistance, like contact us, because even if, I can't spend 80 hours project just managing your project, like if you call me, I'll tell you everything I know, and hopefully help, steer in the right direction. So I'd love to get to know more of you better. Yeah.
One more calendar item, the same date that you might be in Belfast, you could also be in Norway at the CD Convergence. We've got our housing track.
What is that? The what convergence?
CD, Center for Ecology-Based Economy. Met Scott earlier, he's our executive director. And that's on April 23rd.
Ecology-based learning into the housing track.
It's 3 days, but I think the primary things around this topic housing are going to be on Saturday.
It's April 23rd.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, awesome.
We're not in competition.
We'll wait.
Collaboration.
Next year, this will all be happening at the same time, right?
There's coffee where everyone normally is, and then we will start the next workshop a few minutes later.
Sure. Well, there's only
But there's coffee.
Pretty awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much for doing that. That's not easy. It's like taking one day and like trying to. I was a little nervous at first, but then I was like, no, I'm not going to focus on how awful I'm going to look after. I'm just going to put it down. Yeah.
No, I saw people take advantage of this stuff.
Okay. So I will erase this if everybody, you're right. You took a picture of that?
There are definitely examples of that.
Oh, I saw you.
Yeah, good to see you.
I recognize your name.
Yeah, well done.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Like, explain it to me, like, tell me about your hats. So many hats.
I'm wearing many hats. Okay, so I started in cooperatives, converted the business to work in that business.
Yeah.
I've been on the CV board since 9 years ago. We've always had this something big around sustainable housing and affordable housing. And wanted to do it kind of change those.
I was just like, oh,
And then just trying to navigate the fracture.
Exactly.